The growing concentration of Africa's population and major cities has over the recent years emerged as a source of concern for policymakers across the continent. One of the key questions fiscal authorities have been grappling with is whether urbanization will translate to improved standards of living and reduction in poverty. One of the keynote speakers at the 2016 MEFMI Combined Forum held at Washington Renaissance DuPont said Hotel, Sir Paul Collier, a professor of economics and public policy, believes that overwhelming growth will happen in cities and reminded African governments to be ready for the revolution.
Africa can't afford slow. It's got to do fast. And that means you need these effective organizations. They're out there in the world, they need to come to Africa. What do they need? What do they need? They need two things. And the first thing I'm going to talk about is the typical firm, effective organization, needs to operate in what I'm going to call a platform, which is a space, a physical space, where it's feasible to function effectively, to function productively. And that space is going to be a city, and a city that works. I'm going to tell you what a city that works does in a moment, but why cities? We loosely talk about economies developing, countries developing. That's very idle talk. Where economic growth actually happens overwhelmingly is in cities. And there's very good reasons for that. Because cities are able to provide, if they're well managed, they're able to provide the two things that any firm needs. One is energy, and the other is connectivity.
Both cities can be viewed as engines for growth. Professor Collier told the ministers of finance as well as the central bank governors gathered at the combined forum that there is need to double efforts towards increasing connectivity and massive investment in infrastructure.
Connectivity means big investments. Connectivity comes at the cost of a lot of expenditure on roads, not just roads, but roads. As the city gets bigger, a higher proportion of the inner city has to be devoted to roads, maybe 30% of the space. And it requires density. If I want to connect my left hand and my right hand, how can I do it? Two things, both complementary. I can build a link between them, that's the transport link, or I can move them closer together, that's building for density. Typical African city is low density because it's a single-story city of shacks. There hasn't been the investment in multi-story. Multi-story does not mean high-rise. Transport links do not mean railways. The right technology for lower middle income cities for transport is roads with bus lanes, and for density it's 3-story townhouses, maybe up to 5-story apartment blocks. That's the sort of, and they go together. If you can get the density of 3 to 5 stories, then you can do the transport links more easily.
Professor Collier, who is an author of a book titled Exodus, How Migration is Changing Our World, says the region should push for de-risked public borrowing and attract private sector financing in infrastructure development.
You need to borrow, but you cannot afford to borrow commercially. And at the moment, there are very, very few options. What I am fighting for, and what I appeal to you to join me in fighting for, is you need to get access to IBRD. IBRD is de-risked public borrowing. Interest rate on IBRD, what should we say, about 2%. If you borrow at 2% instead of 10%, you're in a different ballgame. Now, in order to make that feasible, you're going to have to, I think, first of all, you come up with a lot of lobbying for that, but you're also going to have to make a lot of commitments on your behalf. In particular, I think you're going to need to commit to the fact that you've got to use all the money for non-commercial infrastructure investment, and that's going to have to be monitored, and you're going to have to put it through a process of public investment, which is a solid process of evaluating and implementing the project properly.
With Asia's economic powerhouse China cited as the example of how urbanization can promote industrialization and improve living standards of people, African governments were urged to have a policy revolution and thinking about urbanization.